Okay, so part 1 of Gaudium et Spes is called The Church and Man's Calling. So it's divided up into 4 chapters. We have chapter 1, the dignity of the human person. Chapter 2, the community of mankind. Right now that you spoke of man as an individual, here he is as a group. Chapter 3, man's activity throughout the world. What does he do? And then chapter 4, the role of the church in the modern world. So what's the point of having the church? How does she help the modern world? Now, talking about the dignity of the human person. Naturally, where does the church go? But where does this dignity originate? And of course, man is the purpose of all creation. The world is created for him. And the document reads, all things on earth should be related to man as their center and crown. This is in Article 12. If man's the purpose of creation, then he's the center of creation, and therefore everything else should be related to him. And of course, why do we have this dignity? Because we're created in the image and likeness of God. So why is there evil? That's always a question. Why is there evil? And Article 13 briefly addresses this. Because man's abused his freedom, we have evil. Granted, that's a much larger question, but it's a much larger question what the church is going to be able to address in one document. And of course, we also address the idea that we have an embodied nature of man. Right? We were speaking about it earlier, that man is body and soul. We cannot be us without both. That's why we have the resurrection of the body, we get it back. Who my soul is, it is formed by my body. If I'm blind, I'm going to see the world differently than if I'm a seeing person. So we have an intellect and will, right? Because of our intellect and will, we have a conscience. Not just I get to do it, but I have an informed conscience, right? Conscience literally means with knowledge. You have to have it with knowledge. You have to put the knowledge in, okay? But it's only because of this freedom that we have that we can turn towards the good. So man gains dignity when freeing himself from all slavery to the passions. He presses forward to his goal by freely choosing to do what is good, and by his diligence and skill, effectively secures for himself the means suited to this end. This is in Article 17. And then, of course, what happens at the end of our lives? We die. You're all gonna die. Have fun. All right, so the document speaks about death, right? While the mind is at a loss before the mystery of death, the church, told by divine revelation, declares that God has revealed man in view of a blessing destiny that lies beyond the limits of his sad state on earth. So from our perspective, we don't see beyond, but from Revelation's perspective, God's revealed that there is a beyond death. And then the document goes through atheism, right? Atheism has been a growing phenomenon, and actually, interestingly enough, those who verbally adhere to atheism generally are men, and men who've had problems with their fathers. But there you go. So it reiterates that we can only discover ourselves through Christ. We can't discover ourselves by belly gazing. We have to look outside of ourselves in order to discover ourselves. And in Article 22, Gaudium et Spes was the quotation most taken from Vatican II that was used by John Paul II. So the truth is only in the mystery of the incarnate word does the mystery of man take on light. For Adam, the first man, was a figure of him who was to come, namely Christ the Lord. Christ, the final Adam, by the revelation of the mystery of the Father in his love, fully reveals man to himself and makes his supreme calling clear. It is not surprising then that in him all the aforementioned truths find their root and attain their crown. So this is one of the most quoted of anything from Vatican II that John Paul II used. Now, St. John Paul II, right? So this section of the document finishes up with saying that Christ is the new man, right? Adam is created, Adam falls. Christ is that new creation, the new man, and is mankind's source of renewal. So we can only be renewed and come to our own fulfillment through Christ. And so we have to turn to Christ in order to understand ourselves and to have this fulfillment. So having understood who we are in reference to Christ, chapter 2 then moves on to who we are in relation to the entire community, the community of mankind. So there is a concern that just because we have better communication, I think 100 years ago, if I lived across the ocean, that letter, you have to write it, it's gonna take 3 months to get there, 3 months to get back. Now I can just pick up a phone and call, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a deeper communication at the deeper level of a personal friendship, right? So think of the image that we now have of a family at a table at a restaurant or a bunch of friends going out together. Generally speaking, they aren't audibly talking amongst themselves. They're usually just sitting down staring at their phones. Sometimes they're messaging each other. Every once in a while I look at her like, Joseph, my brother, I said, you're not even talking, you're sitting right there. Like, no, we're sending messages to each other. So you can, but there's no actual. So does that actual development of technology help us to have that deeper level of fellowship that needs the spiritual level in order to exist? Or do we only stay at that material level? So the progress of the individual and the society are actually linked with each other, right? Think of what helps the soul to grow. Think of the housing projects and the inhuman scale of just how many people can we pack in to as small of a space as possible. And a lot of those large housing projects are now being redone actually because of their inhuman scale, right? So the document also goes on to speak of this widening vision of what the common good is. So remember, everything was created for man, so the common good must be centered on the human person. So the social order and its development must constantly yield to the good of persons, since the order of things must be subordinate to the order of persons and not the other way around. Right? If there's ever a conflict of respecting the person versus having greater development of roads, we know which is going to take place. Respect the person. Hey, people come before things. So then the document goes on and speaks of, okay, so now we've talked about this in our who we are in relation to everything else, what attitudes should we have? So it goes through a number of attitudes. One is just the reverence for the person, right? Just because I disagree with them doesn't mean I don't have a respect for them, okay? We have respect and love for our enemies. There's a basic equality for all. We need, of course, to avoid an individualistic mentality. One of the things that the documents keep coming back to is this idea that we are saved and that we operate in community, in the assembly of the church itself. So these are our attitudes. What are our tools? There's a few tools. How are we going to get there? So one, the document emphasizes two things, responsibility and participation. We have a responsibility to participate in the world around us and to help it heal and to form it and to share our ideas of who we are with it so that it can become better. So people, of course, need to be educated to understand what culture is, which technically it just comes from the Latin word for cult, because your culture is related to your cultus, or how you worship. That's another argument. But people need to be attentive to living conditions. How do I live? Am I living in a sharing of myself in a community, or my number of individuals under the same roof? And of course, these considerations need to be part of the national political process. When we look at politics, do I go into politics thinking of the individual and the good of the people, or not? And finally, the document in this section speaks of the Christian character of the community, right? My Christian character shouldn't remain with me as an individual, but it should affect and transform the entire community around us.